You know, Brian, we're talking increased density, and that's one of the goals here, but I still want to come back to the parking issue because it's a challenge up in there, and congestion is a reality. Can you speak to the issue of relieving some of the parking concerns?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that these sites are going to have their own parking, their own secured parking. If people come and walk to campus, from these neighborhoods, which I think is what is happening, there's not much we as owners of the adjacent property can do about that. That's just part of. I know that other campuses have different zones that you can get a permit and park in. That's not happening in this area just right this time, but it's just public streets with public parking. So I don't know that we can address that. Certainly some of the houses, may have some additional cars parked in front, but that's everybody's right to do that. And there's not much we can do other than provide sufficient parking for our product on our own property.
Additional questions? Seeing none, bring it back to the commission for action.
I move for approval for staff comments.
Have a motion by Mr. Hartman to approve. Have a second by Mr. Bill Johnson. Any additional questions or comments? All those in favor signify with the upraised hand. Motion passes unanimously, 13-0. Next item is agenda item 4.6, City Sign Code Special Review to permit an off-site billboard sign.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dave here out with planning staff. This will be quick on my part because this is a follow-up to our BZA case we heard earlier. This is the request for your sign code special review to allow a placement of the proposed sign within 300 feet of the residential property, which is the Chisholm Creek condominiums that are to the east. The actual distance, the request is to allow that to go down and be within 130 feet. I outlined in the staff report the measurements on the lots. You've seen the site drawing and the location where we're talking about at this location. The photos I showed earlier showed the existing mature screening that exists along essentially the west line of the condominiums adjacent to the slot. So that's what this is request. We would recommend approval, conditioned tied to the conditions that were approved in the BZA. So we tie these things together. And with that, all.
Questions for Dave? Seeing none, agent or applicant?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, my name is Greg Ferris. I represent the applicant in this case. I think we've been over pretty much everything that there is to talk about except for the issue I think that came up was the height. I misspoke. We actually can't build this sign. As you'll see right here, this is a 35-foot building setback. Because it's an off-site sign and not an on-site sign, you're not allowed to build within that setback. The reason that we have to go to the 42 feet is because we actually have to cantilever the building. The code requires, if you cantilever the building, that you have an 8-foot separation, obviously for safety, people walk and those kind of things. So we would ask you not to put any restrictions of height other than what's allowed in the zoning code. If the building isn't built, the conditions of the BZA are that we can't build the sign. If you put a condition of 25 feet, we can't build the sign because you can't build a sign 25 feet because it'll literally be in the building. So we would just ask that you follow the staff's recommendations. I would like to point out a couple of things. We're going through a special review. We don't do very many of these. It's probably only the second or third one that I've been involved in. We did a notification on this property. It was the largest notification list I've ever done on a property this small. We notified over 70 people of this, and I don't know if anybody's here. I don't think there is. They didn't speak at the BZA. I did receive numerous phone calls. They all are very aware of a 42-foot height because we discussed that. They thought the sign was going to be over in this area. They had lots of questions. Once I went through and explained everything, sent them all of the drawings that you have, because they don't get that directly as a general rule from when they get their notice. So and this was all of these were going into this homeowners group over here, the condominium association. They sent out an email with all of the information. And so I don't believe that there's any opposition to this. And based on that, and knowing that they know that it's 42 feet, I don't believe there's any reason not to approve it based on staff's comments. Again, we'll go with the 220 feet and agree with staff. I think they put a reasonable requirement on there. So we'd ask that you just approve it based on staff comments. Be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Ferris? Mr. Foster?
Just a clarification, Greg. When we talked in the other case, I understood 40 foot is what the.
It's 42, I believe.
It's 42 what the zoning would allow?
It's not what was allowed, it's really what's required because you have to have that 8-foot separation.
I got you. Okay. Thank you.
Now, truthfully, it may not be 42 feet because you're only allowed the 8-foot separation. So now that we have cut the height, the size down to 220, we'll probably not go 10 foot by 22 feet. It'll probably be more like 9 or 8.5 by, depending on how those cubes come out. So it's very possible it may be closer to 40 and a half based on just, again, you go to the bottom of the sign which is 8 feet, and then you go to however high it goes after that. Cannot be above 42, that is correct. But it won't, I doubt if it'll be 42.
Any additional questions? Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Anybody from the audience wish to speak on this issue? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission.
I move for approval based on staff comments.
Second.
I've got a question. I've got some comments. I think we need to realize that the condition upon which we're approving this is screening that is upon the property we're supposed to be protecting. So the burden of the screening is on the adjacent. I mean, the applicant's doing nothing to mitigate the process. It's all the screening that's owned by the condominium association. If that screening comes down, this project was built in the late 70s. Those shrubs there are at least 40 years old. I'm not sure what the useful life is. If those have to come down because of a sewer line or some other, or they die, they're going to see this sign out their windows because it's only 15 degrees off of the east-west line. That's the only angle that it has. So anywhere, I drove there last night, I drove there again today, and if those come down for any reason, and even without them, I'm not sure you won't see them over the top of the shrubs, everybody in that condo project is going to see this sign. If it's not angled more than it is towards Woodlawn. So the burden on this is upon the people we're supposed to be protecting. That's what concerns me, is that the applicant's not doing anything to mitigate it except move it closer. And so I just think we need to be aware of that issue, and without a change, I can't support this as it is, because I think at some point in time, they're probably going to wish this sign wasn't there.
Additional questions or comments? Mr. Foster?
Mr. Richardson, do you think if that angle were increased, would that help with the condition?
Well, I think it was. I spent a fair amount of time looking at this on a drawing last night. And in order for this sign not to be visible, even at a point 200 feet north on the property line, it would need to be on a 45-degree angle, not a 15. Now, that could be mitigated with, say, a 30-degree angle and a shield along one side, like insetting the sign on one side. I don't know that we've ever seen that done. It could be done with louvers on that side so it doesn't catch the wind. But without that, if these come down, you're going to see that. So time for me to quit. Any angle that we could do more than the 15 degrees that's suggested would certainly, anything would help face that away. If you drive around and look at these at night, the viewing angle on these new digital signs is really wide. You can see it from 30 degrees even off to the side. I drove down, look at the one, there's one on 21st Street and Webb. You can almost see that thing from 5 or 10 degrees. So, I mean, you know, and again, they turn them down at night. They're supposed to. We all know there are signs that don't get turned down at night according to the code. So again, I'm just concerned that someplace down the line, there isn't anything that can be done that's not going to be on the adjacent property. And so I think the applicant needs to do something to mitigate that potential that's coming down the road, because once it's there, it's not anything anybody can do about it. I'd be
Any
happy
other-
to have you address that, please, yeah.
Did you want to have them come?
I would have you asked to answer those questions if you could, Greg.
Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this an LC zoned lot. The lot adjacent is residential, so there is landscaping requirements on the LC zoning. So if those landscaping went away, would that LC zoning not have landscaping requirements just because it's zoned LC and they're building a building?
That's correct. And in fact, if you recall, one of the things we talked about when we met about this is that the site plan that you have on the screen there does not meet the landscape ordinance.
So I think that issue of the landscaping is really not exactly as you stated, because they will have to do landscaping based on the landscaping code, regardless if those trees are no longer there. As far as the angle, I'm pretty sure, and Terrell may be able to help me on this, but I'm pretty sure that the zoning code only allows 30%. And if you exceed that, that would have had to been part of the BZA variance, because you can't go more than 30% on an angle. So I think that becomes a bit of an issue. Obviously, our goal is to face Woodlawn in the intersection. We might turn that sign a little bit more. It'll still be 30% though. And then the static side, which will be the southbound reader, would be probably a little more facing the area. But I don't think by code we're allowed to go more than 30%.
So it'd be 30 degrees, Scott.
30 degrees, I'm sorry, I meant 30 degrees.
30 degrees off the east-west.
It's 30 degree total. So you can only do a 30 degree total V by the sign code. And since that's a code restriction, the only way to modify that is through a variance.
So we could do parallel on the south side and 30 degree on the,
Yes.
of the, okay.
And if you wanted to do that, I don't really have a problem with that.
I think that,
So if
okay,
you want to put that as a restriction, I don't have a problem with that.
okay, thank you.
Additional questions or comments? Okay, before I call it, do we want to either substitute motion or?
Yeah, I'd make a
I'd
substitute.
modify my motion to incorporate that.
Okay. Let's see, that motion was by Mr. Johnson and second by Mr. Green. You
Yes,
second?
I concur.
Okay, so we have a modified motion incorporating a 30% degree. 30 degree. A 30 degree, yeah, 30%, yeah, man, let's make it really complicated there.
One
30
direction.
Yeah, okay, everybody understand the motion, Mr. Foster?
And perhaps that the landscape requirement address potential buffering as well.
In order to build the building, which they're going to be required to build the building in order to build the sign, they'll have to meet the landscape buffer requirement of the landscape ordinance.
There are no other questions. All those in favor of the motion show uplifted hand. Motion passes unanimously, 13-0. Is that right? 12? 13. If my record's right, we've got one more item. 4.7, city zone change. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Zoning 2019-56 concerns the southeast corner of North 21st and Oliver. You can see the outline of the property in question. It's a church property that sits at that intersection, currently zoned SF5. The request is to rezone that to LC. This is the aerial of the property in question. It's roughly about a square in size. The future land use plan shows this as a residential and employment mix. This is the, actually, I'm looking along North Oliver. This is Shady Brook Lane, I think is the name of the street to the south. And this is the south side of the church in question. The property is right there. This is looking east at the site. This is the church property itself. Their current sign that's out on the corner of 21st and Oliver. This is looking south from across the street. Actually, I'm stopped in the turn lane waiting for the lights to turn. So, yeah, camera takes good pictures. So this is property to the north is the Quick Shop, convenience store that's across the street. On the north side of Oliver, or on 21st Street, on the east side of Oliver. That's looking further north. Well, that's looking north along Oliver from the south side. You're looking as you go north. And I wanted to show this primarily because you can see the raised median that comes out really almost clear up to the intersection, which is an issue of any redevelopment that happens on the church up here further in the foreground because it does not currently have access out onto Oliver. And obviously, if any comes out from that direction on the redevelopment, the only way would be as a right in, right out only. They won't be able to turn south onto Oliver. This is looking east along 21st Street. I'm actually in the drive entrance coming out of the, right on the edge of the Quick Shop. And then that's looking west along 21st Street. And this is the church property in question. You can see the WSU development in the background. And then this is a Quick Shop at 21st and Oliver. So as outlined in the staff report, the intention is to raise the church building. And so there will be a complete redevelopment on the property. As I talk about in the staff report, the issue about access, currently the access is a drive entrance that's been rebuilt at the very east end of the property onto 21st Street so that it can make a left turn onto 21st Street above or past the median, so that will still be allowed. And then currently there's an access out of the parking lot that comes onto Shady Brook Lane. There are no access points coming out to Oliver, and as I showed you on the picture with the raised median now on Oliver all the way to the north, they're going to have in their redevelopment plans access issues they'll have to address within that process going forward. We've recommended approval with the condition of a protective overlay, somewhat kind of consistent with the restrictions placed on the development activity that's happening to the north. That's part of the CUP. There is not CUP on any of the property to the east along the south side of 21st Street. As you can see, it's LC zoning all the way to Baton. And most of the uses here are really more office uses. It's not retail per se, but then I'll let the applicant address what their ultimate redevelopment plans are. But the outside, the PO puts some limitations on so that we're not getting the more egregious uses that we would have that were kind of restricted in the CUP amendments that happened to the north. So with that, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Questions for Dave?
Yes, sir.
Is there a care home right to the east of that?
Yes, I think that kind of also is what goes on to the south. Well, maybe not, but yeah, there is a nursing home type facility. I think it's a medical facility right immediately to the east. And then there is a nursing facility on further to the east.
Additional questions? Thank you, Dave. Agent or applicant? Russ, I don't know how you do the last straw there, short straw to get the last agenda item.
Russ, AV agent for the applicant with Boffman Company. The answer is simple. Very few people like me. So I think it dawned on me when I was looking at myself in the mirror and I was getting pretty discouraged. And it dawned on me that walking my applications up at about 5 till 4 on the filing Mondays probably puts me numerically at a disadvantage. So I thought I'd save everybody the short puns, and just go with the truth. So I'll stand for any questions. I think unlike the last time I was up here representing a zoning case at this intersection, I think we have a lot fewer factors in play. I think I can assure you that I initially pushed back against staff's recommendation of me providing a protective overlay, basically on principle, if nothing else. But in having a chance to work with Dave and Scott on the protective overlay, I think what we've tried to package up before you today is something that's fairly reasonable and in keeping, again, as staff mentioned, with other protections in the neighborhood. And I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Any questions for us? Mr. Dewell?
Without reading through the proposed uses, is there any difference between your proposed uses and staff proposed uses?
No. The protective overlay that staff incorporated in their staff report, as well as your final page, they should be harmonious. I'm pretty certain that Mr. Yearout just copied and pasted it. I appreciate it. It's that level of respect, yes.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Anybody from the audience wish to speak on this issue? Yes, ma'am. You can step forward, state your name and address for the record, please, and you will have 3 minutes. If you need help running the PowerPoint, you can ask staff and they'll come up and show you how to operate that.
My name is Judy Pollard Licklider. I'm the president of Aaron's Hope Foundation, which is at 4921 East 21st Street. And we are directly east of the church property, which is in question here. I was curious in the photographs that were provided that we were eliminated from that. We are directly east of the Unity Church. And so that we are not shown in any photograph. We are a medical therapy clinic and a special purpose school for children with multiple disabilities. And so any change to the property is something that's going to have immediate impact on us. And so I was just wanting to know a little bit more about what the purpose and plan is. So anyway, that's my question.
Thank you. We'll get that question answered. Is there anybody else in the audience who wishes to speak on this issue? Russ, you want to come? Oh, go ahead, sir. If you want, again, state your name and address for the record again. I know you've done that once, but.
James Roseberry, 4518 Greenbrier, and my concern is this. Now, I want understanding on this. They're going to add on to the church. They're going to tear it completely down. And we'd like to know what's going to go in there. Because right now, 21st and all was bothersome to my neighborhood association, which is right across the street. On Sundays and Saturdays during the heavy traffic, it's almost possible to turn to the east there off Oliver. And so just curious to know why all of a sudden what's going in there would be a big concern. And also it's a neighborhood association that may not be known. That's just to the east of that. And I want to know if those people, and then regard to the lady here, was anybody in that neighborhood contacted? I know the District 1 Congressman Brandon Johnson lived less than a half a mile from there. And so I'd just like to know something when I go to my meeting tonight to tell the people what's happening.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for the speaker? Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience wish to speak on this issue? State your name and address for the record, please, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, Steve Falke, number 3, Crestview Lakes Estates. I just want to go on record and say that personally, I like Russ. So he's a good guy. And I do want to say that this church for years, and in addition, Aaron's Hope, they've been very good neighbors to the neighborhood. I'm sorry to see that the church get redeveloped, but we've all seen this coming down the road for quite a while. And then the only other comment I would have is just to make sure that in that protective overlay, we don't end up allowing something that has outdoor amplification that would be too loud for the adjacent neighborhood. So that's all I've got. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thank you, sir. Is there anybody else in the audience wish to speak on this issue? Seeing none, Russ, you have the floor. You have 2 minutes for rebuttal.
Thank you. Russ Avey, Boffman Company, agent for the applicant again. So this is one of those circumstances where we have 3 different competing potential projects for this site. So our client is looking to divest the church of the property. The contract purchaser in this for this property is looking at 3 different options that range anywhere from a restaurant, which was actually one of the land uses brought up, especially during the district advisory board meeting back in October for previous the northwest corner of this intersection's discussion, as well as a student housing project. So those are the 2 primary things. Are those hard options? Yes. Can I speak to whether or not one is more viable than the other at this location? Not at this time. So we are looking at this for a potential of different land uses, all of which are permitted by the protective overlay, all of which, again, should conform with other use restrictions at this intersection as well as throughout the city. There was a comment just now made about sound amplification. In our CUPs, we usually have one sentence that we typically like to use about any outdoor amplification or outdoor speakers shall not project sound beyond the boundaries of the project. We would be probably happy with adding that to the protective overlay. I was a little bit surprised that it wasn't just thrown in there to begin with. So that would be something that we would also consider to address, not only the last speaker's concern, but as well as the adjacent property owner to the east, as well as the assisted living complex a couple hundred feet to the southeast. So
I can address that. That clause that Boffman often includes in their CUPs actually is a copy and paste from the zoning code. It's a standard requirement.
Additional, yeah, Mr. Florence.
Yeah, did you take this in front of the District 1 DAB board?
So there was another case going to District Advisory Board 1, and I believe that would be the February 3rd, 2020 DAB 1 meeting. This is one of those cases that it is, we are here before the District Advisory Board, whereas the previous instance, we try to have the District Advisory Board meeting prior to this meeting, but no, that'll happen in a few weeks.
Mr. Foster.
Scott, should we add to this protective overlay the sound amplification issue, or is that automatically covered?
It's a standard code requirement. So I mean, you can put it in the protective overlay, but it's required anyway on all projects, actually.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Move we approve per staff comment.
Motion by Mr. Green, second by Mr. Dool. Any additional questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor, so up raised hand. Those opposed? Okay, 12-1 passes.
11-1, we got.
And one abstention, 11-1. Yeah, okay, 11-1. Okay, next item is to initiate the Delano Neighborhood Land Use Plan.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Matt Williams with Planning Staff. Today I'm here to talk about the Delano Neighborhood Land Use Plan. The Delano Neighborhood Plan was adopted in July of 2019, and many of those short-term recommendations have already undergone some planning, and many are in the planning stages. That includes the Ballpark Village, McLean Boulevard, and work on a multi-use path in the neighborhood. At this point, it's time to start one of the next short-term initiatives, and that's adopting a future land use strategy that can help the neighborhood move into the future. The future land use strategy initiative found within the Delano plan is comprised of a future land use map that would help with future rezonings in the neighborhood, a plan for rezoning the commercial properties along Douglas between Vine and McLean to Central Business District, while removing a barrier to redevelopment, and then also amending the Delano overlay boundaries and the neighborhood design guidelines. The Metropolitan Area Planning Department is going to lead this initiative while establishing the Delano United Group as the advisory committee for this. Planning staff is recommending a process that will run throughout the year, and some of those tentative timeline dates are in your staff report. We've been keeping advanced plans up to date on what we're doing with this, and they are recommending that the commission initiate this plan. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Foster?
Matthew, I'm curious, you mentioned design guidelines. What have you learned recently that you might be reconsidering or discussion about design guidelines?
I think the main thing that we've learned about design guidelines over the past few years is that the design guidelines right now cover the whole entire neighborhood, and that maybe specific design guidelines along Douglas Avenue, some of those more historic buildings, shouldn't necessarily apply to along Seneca where the new restaurant is, or different parts of the neighborhood that are more residential. Just maybe adopting sub-districts within the neighborhood for specific design guidelines and not applying them to the whole neighborhood.
The other thing that the neighborhood has asked, and if you'll recall, when the Delano overlay was originally adopted, it did not include the entire neighborhood. And so that's the other piece of this, is that the neighborhood would like to see the northeast quadrant of the neighborhood also included in the overlay. So that'll be part of the discussion as well in establishing the appropriate design guidelines for that location.
Additional questions? Got a recommended action at the bottom of the page. Somebody want to make that?
I move we initiate the process to create a Delano neighborhood land use plan.
Second. We have a motion by Mr. Johnson and a second by Mr. Green. All those in favor signify by upraised hand. Motion passes unanimously. I think we're at 12-0. With that, we are adjourned.